Today we will be covering Hold Your Breath with Sarah Paulson, because every time she ugly cries, y'all better hold your breath, because it stank. Margaret dreams of a green summer and playing with her daughters before it turns into a recurring nightmare of a dust storm. Every asthmatic person's greatest fear. She wakes up from this nightmare. 1933 in the Oklahoma Panhandle, Margaret lives with her two daughters, Rose and Ollie. Her husband, Henry, is away for work and she's left to tend to the house and their children. She refuses to travel with him because she doesn't want to leave behind her dead daughter, Ada, who died not long ago. Rose reads the story of the gray man to Ollie, who is mute. It's about a man who burned his family and accidentally burned himself to death. His ashes continue to wander, and once he enters your body, he'll make you do terrible things. He need to enter my body because I'm tired of this dry spell. The next day, the three visit a relative. Margaret can't help but notice that Esther is poorly managing her house, and there's dust everywhere. Her son, Thomas, keeps coughing, and the doctor said he has pneumonia. During a regular meetup with other women, Margaret hears the story about a drifter who attacked and killed a mother and her kids. Suspiciously, he is said to have vanished without a trace. Despite Margaret telling Esther it's not safe to travel, she still wants to take her boys with her and leave town. Margaret tells Esther to just clean and keep the boys inside, but Esther insists it's useless because dust seeps in any crack and enters the house. Afterward, Margaret and her girls run as fast as they can to avoid the approaching sandstorm, locking up the house to prevent any dust from getting in. Meanwhile, Ollie sees a man standing in the middle of the storm, so she hides in a closet. Worried that it's the drifter, Margaret takes her gun and checks the barn, but doesn't find anyone. She assures Ollie that the gray man is just a story. Then she takes the book so the girls will stop reading it and become illiterate. She takes her sleeping pills but wakes up after a familiar nightmare. The next day, Margaret checks the barn after the girls said there's a man outside. However, it's only Esther's horse that she finds wandering outside. After last night's sandstorm, the cart carrying Esther's family was overturned, leaving them all unprotected. Jacob died, but luckily Esther and Thomas have survived. The women in town support Esther as she grieves her dead son. Margaret sweeps off the thick dust on the floor, angry that the women in town all rely on their faith. She tells them to do something about their situation and not just rely on what they think is God's plan. During Jacob's burial, Thomas keeps coughing that it's almost too painful for Margaret to hear. She takes the girls to Dr. Cox for a regular checkup. Rose's nose is bleeding, and Margaret is worried because Ada's nose used to bleed before. The doctor offers some masks for sale, then advises Margaret to seal up every crack in the house and stay calm. So Margaret tears up a fabric and covers every opening in the girls' room to make sure dust won't get in. To her disappointment, it still finds its way inside. Rose wants to leave town and go to their father, so Margaret tells her they will leave on the next train as soon as Henry sends they broke asses some money. She asks about the drifter at church, but the women said the father must have made up the story and he was the one who killed his family. Witnesses said he had been acting differently before the murders. She reveals her plan to leave town once they receive Henry's letter. However, no one in town has received any letter because the dust storms have blocked off the trains. With her guards up, Margaret notices every small thing in their property. She scolds Rose when she sees the barn door open, reminding her to make sure to close it every time. Their one cow is their only lifeline, so she wants to make sure it's safe. She goes up the barn thinking that the girls are there because she heard a noise. To her surprise, it's empty. She asks Ollie about the man she saw before, then she takes her gun to check once more. A man emerges from beneath the floor, introducing himself as Brother Wallace Grady. Margaret keeps the gun pointed at him, listening as he explains that Henry told him about the barn. Margaret doesn't care if Wallace is a preacher or even if he met Henry. She still wants him to leave. Wallace pleads, saying he'll get the cow producing milk again, or he can preach God's words. Still, Margaret insists that rain is what they need. Rose's nose starts bleeding, and Wallace takes the chance to prove himself. He approaches Rose and presses his hand on her face, saying he'll heal her. "Oh, hell nah, fam. I wouldn't let some stranger touch my kids." Margaret is surprised that Rose's nose stops bleeding, so she lets the man stay in the barn, and he has to keep his promise to get the cow producing again. The next day, Margaret wakes up to find that it's raining. She sees Wallace standing in the rain, with his arms stretched up reaching to the skies. One day, the women find Thomas wandering alone outside. Sheriff Bell thinks that Esther has been neglecting the boy, so Margaret volunteers to talk to her. Margaret checks on Esther and finds that the house is not well kept. Esther hasn't left the bed for days after Jacob's death, and her back has huge bed sores. Margaret then tells the sheriff that Esther is not fit to look after Thomas. The sheriff takes the boy away, And as the car leaves, Esther swears that something bad will also happen to Margaret and her kids. And I swear that I'm about to slap this hoe. After curing Rose, Margaret decides to let Wallace stay in the barn. He says his father was a preacher and some of his sisters died due to scarlet fever. Margaret reveals that Ada and Ollie got sick with scarlet fever before and had to go to quarantine. She says she clawed at the door separating them until her nails were ripped away. Then she tells Wallace that after Ada died, she couldn't sleep and ended up doing things. Rose announces that the mailman said a haze is coming in. Later that night during dinner, Rose excitedly opens the letter from their father. After reading, she hands it to her mother to read the rest. Margaret gets scared and signals Rose to get the gun without saying a word. Wallace realizes that something has changed. Margaret suddenly points the gun at him, while Rose reads aloud the rest of the letter. In the letter, Henry revealed that a man who introduced himself as a preacher stole his jacket along with the money, letter, and candy for the girls. The preacher also asked to stay the night, and the next day Henry's bunkmate was dead with a cracked head. The gray man was a whitey all along. Wallace refuses to let Ollie go, and he wants Margaret to hand him the letter first. Margaret shoots the wall to scare him, but he still manages to snatch the letter from Rose. Then he burns it to rid of any evidence of his crime. Margaret is angry because they could have left town earlier had the letter arrived on time. Wallace warns them that no lock could stop him or the gray man from getting in. Then he walks out the door, forced to face the sandstorm in the middle of the night. Worried he'll come back, Margaret takes the gun and guards the house from the outside. She goes to the barn and hears Ollie calling out for her. Then Esther shows up and holds Ollie from behind, threatening Margaret that she too will lose her mind. Then Margaret wakes up, only realizing that it was just another nightmare. She spends most nights just like that, wide awake and checking every crack and opening to stop the dust from getting in. One night, the girls start screaming, and she rushes to open the door to get them. The bed has caught fire, but she quickly puts it out and saves the girls. Rose asks her if she has knocked the lamp over, but Margaret says that it was Wallace who did it. She's convinced that Wallace could get through any opening, just like the gray man, and she refuses to listen to Rose saying that the gray man is just a story. Esther comes over to apologize and check on them. She says she's been talking to a preacher and has been visiting her son too. She tells Margaret that people are starting to worry because they haven't seen the Bellums around, and that Margaret wouldn't want the townspeople speculating that something is wrong. So Margaret prepares her kids for the dance, telling them that they have to show up to assure everyone that everything is okay. She hears Rose screaming. Thinking that Rose is choking and can't breathe, Margaret tears off her clothes until Rose pulls away and tells her to stop. Margaret is surprised because she was sure she heard her scream, but Rose says she was playing with Ollie. The dress is torn, but Margaret says they should still attend the dance. She tells Rose not to tell anyone about her hallucinations because they will take them away from her. Then she makes a small cut on her leg and dabs some blood on her cheeks for color. Rose is shocked, but Margaret assures her that everything is fine. At the dance, Margaret panics when she sees Rose talking to the sheriff. She suspects that her daughter must have said something to him. While dancing, the sheriff notices Margaret's thigh is bleeding, so she explains that it's just a small cut. When the doors open, she's surprised to see Esther walk in with Wallace, a match made in the seventh circle of hell. She gets angry and confronts the two. However, she's hallucinating again, and the man is not Wallace but a different preacher. To save her mother, Rose reveals that Wallace does exist and that he's a thief and a possible killer. Esther advises Margaret to talk to a preacher to clear her thoughts. However, Margaret keeps insisting that Wallace comes apart like dust and can get in through any closed doors or windows. Back at home, Margaret is going batshit crazy again. She even accidentally sewed her hand in the embroidery she was making, and Rose has to cut her free. They hear someone knock, but Margaret thinks it's Wallace again. She takes the gun and looks for him despite the sand covering the view. She pulls the trigger when she sees his silhouette, then goes back inside when he disappears. Rose sleeps, holding her younger sister close. When she wakes up, she looks for Margaret, worried that she didn't sleep again. She's frightened to find her mother wearing her dress backwards, clawing at the walls with bleeding fingers, crying and pleading. Margaret runs out of the house and Rose finds her standing outside holding a gun. However, Margaret sees Wallace's face mocking her and not Rose's. She points the gun at him, ready to shoot any moment. Rose keeps screaming, asking her not to shoot because she's her daughter. Luckily, Margaret snaps back to reality. Rose cries and reveals that it was Margaret who is haunting them and not Wallace. She says Margaret is the one moving the chairs and the reason that the bed caught fire. Margaret then reveals that she'll do anything to keep them all together because there is no way she'll leave Ada behind, even though she's dead. Frightened, Rose tries to run away and hide. She picks up Ollie and tells her they have to escape, but Ollie pushes her away. Rose falls on top of Esther's dead body, and it has finally dawned on her what her mother has done. Another sandstorm is coming, and Rose doesn't want to leave her sister behind. Margaret picks up Ollie and carries her inside, knowing that Rose will follow. Rose and Margaret argue because Rose knows they are not safe anymore. However, her mother manages to catch her and stop her from screaming. When someone knocks at the door, Rose signs to Ollie to open it. Sheriff Bell notices that something is wrong when Ollie lets him in. His suspicion grows stronger when Rose reveals to him that Margaret is looking insane. He sends the girls outside to talk to Margaret in private. He says he has to take the girls away for a while until she gets better. Margaret cries because she doesn't want to let the girls go. Then she stabs the sheriff twice in the fupa and lets him fall. Even though she's scared, Rose picks up the knife and approaches her mother. Margaret knows that she'll be hanged for the murders, so she thinks the only way for their family to stay together is if they all die. Rose cries as she hugs and pleads with her mother, but she knows it's useless. Then she tells Margaret to mix the crushed pills with peaches. While Margaret is busy, she hears Rose screaming that Ollie ran out of the house. So Margaret ties one end of the rope to the door handle, and she holds the other hand as she searches for her daughter. Rose takes the chance to cut the rope, finally letting her mother go. Then she goes back inside to Ollie. Margaret continues to call Ollie's name until she realizes that the rope has been cut. She's lost in the middle of the sandstorm, and it's impossible to find her way back. She starts drowning in the dust, choking and unable to breathe. She imagines seeing her daughters in a beautiful place one last time before death finally takes her. Rose and Ollie leave their town to go to their father. They smile as they watch the dry and dusty land slowly turn green as they move further away from home.
Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like. It really helps the channel.